Now, as I understood my role this evening, it was to pose a question to our featured speaker tonight rather than present my own views, and so that's what I've prepared. Robbie, as I listened to your paper, it seemed to me that you launch a two-pronged attack on the problem of evil. Negatively, you show the inadequacy of the atheistic account of evil. Positively, you lay out a Christian perspective on suffering. Now, I'd like to focus on your negative critique of the atheistic account. You present the following argument in 3 steps. Step 1, objective moral values exist only if God exists. Step 2, objective moral values do exist. 3, therefore, God exists. Now, this is a logically valid argument, as you point out, and therefore the atheist's only recourse is to deny that one of the premises is true. But you ask, which one will he deny? I think this is certainly the right question to ask, and I want to press it further because I think that you somewhat let the atheist off the hook in your lecture. You surmise that the atheist will try to deny premise 1, that objective moral values exist only if God exists, and he'll try to deny this by appealing to evolutionary ethics. He will hold that we have evolved moral values in the struggle for survival. And your response to this is that sociobiological attempts to explain morality are implausible in light of people whose lives are lived in self-sacrifice and service to others. Sociobiology can't make sense, for example, of a Mother Teresa. On their view, she turns out to be a sort of evolutionary mutant, a sort of genetic defect. Now, I think that you're right about the implausibility of such sociobiological accounts of ethics, but the problem, I think, goes much deeper. What does it mean to say that moral values are objective? It means, I believe, to say that they are valid independently of whether anybody believes in them or not. It's to say, for example, that the Holocaust was wrong, even though the Nazis thought it was right. And it would still have been wrong, even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in exterminating or brainwashing everybody who disagreed with them. But then it's evident, I think, and our conversations with Dr. Lycan bear this out, I think, that proponents of evolutionary ethics don't affirm the objectivity of moral values in that sense. For on their view, moral values are simply biologically determined traits which have evolved because of their survival value and utility. If the initial conditions had been different, then a quite different set of traits might have evolved. And then we would have a different morality. For this reason, intelligent life, which evolved on another planet, might find no reason at all to regard human beings as morally valuable or endowed with human rights or inherent dignity. Human rights would be a delusion of grandeur on the part of these hairless apes. And thus, evolutionary accounts of ethics actually go to support rather than to refute your first premise, namely that objective moral values exist only if God exists. They show that in the absence of God, there just are no objective moral values. Well, now, it might be said then that evolutionary ethics serve to undermine your second premise, that objective moral values do exist. But then what I want to know is, how can the atheist press the problem of evil if there is no objective wrong? By asserting that evil exists, doesn't the atheist acknowledge that objective moral values exist? For some things are evil. So isn't it the case that wholly apart from the success or failure of evolutionary ethics in explaining the lives of people who live noble and sacrificial lives, the even deeper deficiency in such a view is that such a position only strengthens the force of your argument by underscoring the fact that in the absence of God, objective moral values simply do not exist.
We will now hear from, again, our panelist on this issue of evolutionary ethics. I am sure that Dr. Lycan has something to say. First of all, Ravi Zacharias, do you have a comment at all?
Bill Craig's absolutely right. And I was hoping, of course, that in my door number 1, Bill, where we were talking, where I moved them from the argument of J.L. Mackie, who ultimately ended up, with the subjective side of it, and then taking him through Richard Dawkins, where he denied that even there is such a thing as evil. And in his Selfish Gene tried to, which I've always said would have been better titled The Selfish Genius rather than The Selfish Gene, and taking them ultimately through Hobart Mauer's quote that they have lost their very sense of essential value and worth. You're right, the argument has to be pushed further. I've pushed it further in my writings, never had anybody really counter it, and basically what you get is this kind of self-contradiction, that objective moral values don't exist, but we are better than they were 2,000 years ago. And while there is no absolute moral right or wrong, I do think it is a good thing not to torture babies. I mean, this kind of some smuggling in objective moral values while denying a point of measurement. And maybe this is where the interaction with Dr. Mohanty is really valid and to the point. Why God, if you do grant that objective moral values exist?
My position is obviously a little different from Professor Lycan's. I believe in objective moral values. I consider moral relativism to be mistaken. I believe in objective property of beauty in things which are beautiful. I believe in objective property of sacredness in living beings. But from accepting objective moral values, the argument to God seems to me still require many missing links which have not been provided. You both have been critiquing a very weak theory, namely an evolutionary naturalistic theory of moral values. And I didn't even think it's worthwhile to devote so much of time to that. I think that is a sign of the way modern biology and science has been influencing our thinking, that we think that to be the greatest problem. Objective moral values for me is almost a given datum in our moral experience. I don't have to go to science to confirm or disconfirm it. Just as objective beauty is an experience, is a datum of my aesthetic experience. Objective sacredness of living beings is a datum in my religious experience. But to find a source for it as an explanation, firstly for me is uncalled for, because even if you posit a source, I can still ask, what explains the sacredness of the source? What explains the morality of the source? You will say, because he is a moral being. But that is only begging the issue already. I would accept objective moral values. G. Moore did that. Goodness is a non-natural objective property of things. Objective beauty, objective moral values are accepted by Kant, but did not use gods as the source of the moral values. So it is not obvious to me that accepting objective moral values means that you are committed to a source of the moral values, a lawgiver. As a matter of fact, Kant would have regarded that as a heteronomy of reason and incompatible with the fundamental moral experience that I am autonomous, that someone else gave the law. So I would put it this way. Let us not be concerned with evolutionary biology. There are lots of different sciences. There is physics, there are all the other sciences. Not that the relativism about moral values is old. It goes back to the Greek science already. And it has been considered by the whole history of thought. And I think the objectivity is a very plausible, satisfactory philosophical position for which one can argue. But I do not see that accepting that commits me to a source of the moral values. The moral values are there, actually, in the world.